Next we have JB10 Creed, who is manager of grass Merinos. He came from a non-traditional farming background to be thrown into managing an agricultural business, and he's gone all boots and all into objective measurements, and he's about to tell us about that process and that journey. So thanks, JB.
Thanks. As you can see, I haven't changed the name of my speech either. And I think I may skip over a couple of things because Ian's done an excellent job in defining indexes and what they do. But I'd like to think that you will come away from my speech knowing why we use our selection index at Grass, how we use it, but also why. So I'll talk quickly about selection indexes and then grass Merinos and how we use a custom index at Grass. So I've just pulled that directly off the Sheep Genetics website. I think the main thing which Ian then outlined is that a lot of commercial producers don't realise that indexes actually come from modelling farm businesses. I think they think it is just a combination of traits, but really it's modelling whole farm businesses with prices, so which actually make a massive difference. So when you look at, for example, the Merino indexes, fibre production plus, obviously it's a finer type, New England type production system, whereas the Merino production plus being a wool-based, a fleece weight based system, and then the dual purpose plus index speaks for itself. So just quickly, grass Merinos must have been something about the 70s. Grass Merinos commenced in 1975 with 10 growers and an agronomist wanting objectively measured sheep. They were sick of rams coming out of a shed that had been fed and then not performing. So they each put in their best young ewes by fleece weighing, and each of those young ewes had to have reared a lamb. So, and they continued to put their best young ewes into the system every year until Yonis closed that. Grass was always involved in breeding values right from the word go, and also indexes. And you'll see shortly when we commenced with indexes. So there are still 10 ram purchasing directors, but the majority of our ram sales still go to outside clients. So the directors own the sheep, but not the land. So it's really just the sheep that the directors own. Those directors have a direct influence on the decisions made in the stud. So as I think Steve said earlier, it's definitely a pull for those directors. They're the ones making the decisions because it's affecting their system. It's not us as the managers. And I would like to say that my wife Alison I manage it with my wife, so that wasn't mentioned. So we took over in 2017. So Grass Merinos has been going for a long time in objective measurements. So I've been advised that Grass actually created its first index in 1980, but that's probably in a book somewhere in a cupboard. So I've got from just quickly 86 to 94, and you can see quite an interesting selection process, but clean fleece weight, 94 to 2004, you see fibre diameter being increasing, but clean fleece weight being still the major driver in our index. So when Alison and I took over in the end of 2017, we got the directors together to rewrite the grass breeding objective. So, as you can see, it's a heavy cutting, highly fertile, low wrinkle, pole sheep structurally sound. So we wanted to increase clean fleece weight and number of lambs weaned, reduce breech and body wrinkle as well as horns. We wanted to increase stable strength, eye muscle depth and fat, and finally maintain fibre diameter and limiting adult weight. So it's a very specific breeding objective, but had lots of traits in it which we felt like we had to do. But as you probably realised, at least 6 of those traits, each working against each other. I think clean fleece weight, you can probably get from that graph that the clean fleece weight in Merinos is the antagonistic trait, but it is still such an economic profit driver for Merinos. As you can see, the red being a, well, negative movement. So there's the 6 negative movements there that we have to work with, 6 antagonistic traits. So we knew that we had this issue. We knew that we didn't want to go backwards with our clean fleece weight, but in bringing these new traits into our system, we knew that we were going to struggle managing that. So we needed an index that would align with that breeding objective. And as I said, what we didn't want to do was lose the 40 years of genetic gain that we had made. So we decided to approach, it was actually Peter Bradley was the Merino officer at the time, and Agbu to not only add early breech wrinkle into our index, but obviously to add those other traits as well. Now, early breech wrinkle hadn't been in any indexes as yet because obviously there's not an economic, there's not an exact economic contributor. So Agbu had to come up with a way of bringing early breech wrinkle into that custom index. So we thought it was excellent that we were able to do that, be the first people to do that. So there it is, that's how it came up. We referred to it as the Grass Merino Production Plus. I think it's actually now, grass has been dropped because some other studs are using it, which is great. So then Ian talked about the predictive responses. So that's probably the most important thing. If you look at, they're the responses that we should expect over a 10-year period. So as you can see, if you remember our breeding objective, primarily clean fleece weight, number of lambs weaned, and early breech wrinkle were our 3 main contributors. And as you can see, if it works, then that's really going to meet what we're after, with yielding weight going up, fibre diameter slightly going up, stable strength going up. So, sorry, fibre diameter slightly going down. So if that worked, then that was exactly what we wanted. We obviously needed to make sure that everything going in was as accurate as possible. At Grass, we'd always struggled a little bit to find the best way to sort out our fixed data. We had lamb mothered up in the yards. We'd used Pedigree Matchmaker, and then the manager before us had just started to be at the birth site. And luckily for Alison and I, it was just about the time that the DNA really came along board, and we were able to convince our directors to fully DNA test and all our ewes. And so now we use DNA parentage at land marking, and we pay the extra couple of dollars to have the 50K snip. So that is something that is part of our system. We also use we take all those measurements, obviously marking an adult breech score. We ceased mulesing so we could take adults' breech scores. Now that was, it was a complete stop right at once, which was very difficult for us, but we saw such importance of actually being able to take adult breech scores as necessary for us to continue to do that. So I won't go through all those, but 26 or so measurements that we do, including all the yearling visual scores and then adult visual scores. So then how we use our index, it's really the Hoggett visual classing that we have the index where we want it, enough information into that index. The yearling visual classing is really completely visual, but at the Hoggett visual classing, if there is a ewe or a ram that still makes the grade on the visual data, on the visual classing, but its index is not high enough, then it actually goes out. So we have a bottom end, and in the years when we have higher lambing where we are, then it allows us to drop out more young rams and more young ewes based on the index itself. And it allows us to continue to rank our sheep based on our breeding objective. I mean, we're very lucky to have an index that is pretty much exactly based around our breeding objective. And hopefully you've realised that what that index does for us is takes out our guesswork of how antagonistic each of those traits are. So it does that for us, and obviously it also takes into account the fixed effects. So that's the first part of what we do. Now the second part of how we use our index is how we select our young sires. So our sires, those that make the classing grade, are all ranked based on our index. So obviously the top being number 1, right through to number 300. And so there you can see that's all our bosses looking over every sheep as they do. And so what happens is we look at those. Our directors come and they look at every one of those 50 rams and decide which they want to use in our system. So it's an interesting day. It's a wonderful day, but it's also a bit stressful actually for Alison and I. So that's what they see. Obviously, that's the top 25. That very first ram is the highest ranking ram of last year's drop. And we go from 1 to 25 and look at every one. I just wanted to point out one thing we need to be, I guess, aware of, and I think everyone needs to be aware of. So some of those guys, even though they're right up the top of our index, they don't fully meet our breeding objective. So he was the 4th best young ram, and he went out at that stage for yearling weight. Now, I have from memory, he had something else slightly wrong with his feet that a director didn't like, because that's potentially not that bad. But those 3 went out on wrinkle. Definitely went out on wrinkle, and definitely went out on stable strength. So that's a great, and as Ian showed, it's a great example of high ranking rams that actually don't, on our index, but don't meet our breeding objective. Now number 17, if you can see his data, it might be hard to see, but there was a lot of discussion and our chairman raised him about his clean fleece weight. But if you look at all his other data, he's a bit of a superstar, and he was a beautiful looking ram phenotypically, so he stayed. There's definitely some different opinions in our directors and everybody wanting slightly different things, so he stayed, and we ended up using him as a young sire this year. Those guys went out. We're not breeding from horned rams at all. And then interestingly, this fellow also went out after we looked at all the progeny. Even though he had a DP plus index of 232, which if there's Merino producers here, that means something to you. He was an amazing ram physically, but he wasn't throwing the progeny that we wanted. And really, we only worked that out after we saw the progeny. So now this is a lot of numbers, but this is what we've been doing since we brought this new index in. And I guess that's the most important thing. So since 2017, we've been making those gains, which actually, I only pulled this up last week, and a lot of those, we're already reaching those 10-year gains with only 4 years of selection pressure. Now, I think some of that is part of the accuracy increase based on our ability to improve our fixed effects, but it also shows that the index is doing what we asked it to do. So hopefully in 5 years' time, we'll have, everything will still be working. Early breech wrinkle will be hopefully at minus 0.6, and yielding clean fleece weight will be hopefully increasing as well. So, those antagonistic traits where we've been able to break. So in summary, I think at grass, we've always seen the benefit of selection indexes, although I think selection indexes are really improving, and what we're able to put in them is really driving us forward. I think it's really important to use an index that aligns with your breeding objective, obviously. But, and I wanted to, Hamish Chandler mentioned this yesterday, what the selection index does for us is that it allows us to have not a perfect, but a really high selection efficiency. Obviously there'll always be sheep going out with physical faults, but it allows us to have that perfect selection efficiency. And so with all the data that goes into our index, it finishes with our finished product. Thank you.